Those cues. Those cues of Omega Sci-Fi. We took about to do or die. To we of the frat cats. Move up and wish we want to know. Cues. Can you move like this? Wherever we walk, we run, we twist, we hop, we spin for Omega Sci-Fi. I said we a spin, a shoot. Now break it on down for my cue. Side cue. I'm not afraid to tell the whole world I pledge the Q Sci-Fi. The way we walk, oh yeah, the way we talk, oh yeah, the way we Q Sci-Fi. Or E. It goes a blip, a block, a blip, block. I said we are them dogs. I said what? I said we are them dogs. I said what? I said we are them dogs of Omega Sci-Fi. I, sweet loving dogs till the day that we die. We made them. Oh yes, we did. To do or die. Order to serve the Omega Sci-Fi. Q.
We are the Alpha Delta Zeta Ghost Chapter of the Omega Sci-Fi Fraternity Incorporated here at UNCG. We'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight to support Dr. Armondo Collins. We'd also like to formally invite everyone to our 30th celebration of our spring 1992 line on Saturday, October 15th. We'll be having a cookout in Fowles Park, and everyone is welcome to come and join us with some free food, some vibes, and the hospitality of the Bruz.
Like I had to catch my breath, like I was up here doing it. I really enjoyed it. Can we have another round of applause? With that being said, I want to introduce our moderator for the night. Mr. Mario Singleton is from Charlotte, North Carolina. However, he has resided in Greensboro for the past 32 years. Mario graduated from the Bryan School of Business and Economics with a degree in Business Administration. He later got a dual master's in Health Administration and Business Administration from Pfeiffer University. Mario was initiated to Omega Sci-Fi Fraternity Incorporated in the spring of 1994. He has worked in the healthcare field for the past 20 years and is currently the practice manager of the Oak Street Health Summit Avenue location here in Greensboro, North Carolina. Mario resides in Brown Summit, come on, 27214, where he lives with his wife, Adrian, and his two daughters, Maya and Michaela. So now can we have a round of applause introducing our moderator? And now we'll have Mario read the bio for Dr. Collins, and we'll get right into our book talk. We do have pen and paper in the back. If you think of a question as we are discussing that you want to have submitted, just write down your question and see me, and I'll be happy to bring it up here. Again, thank you and welcome. Oh, you don't have to clap for
me. Dr. Collins is a UNCG alum. He earned a PhD in English rhetoric and composition in 2018 after earning a post-baccalaureate certificate in African American and African diaspora studies in 2014. Dr. Collins joined the UNCG family in 2010 and has been involved in teaching and service across campus since then. He is currently an assistant professor of African American literature, thought, and cultural studies at California Polytechnic in Pomona, California. Dr. Collins was formerly the department head of the Digital Media Commons in Jackson Library, where he served as a digital media specialist, teaching multimodal writing across the curriculum since 2012. Dr. Collins has also served as an adjunct and visiting assistant professor in our university's African American and African Diaspora Studies program from 2015 to 2022. His research and teaching emphasize cultural and digital rhetorics within African American and African Diaspora Studies. In addition to his creative writing efforts, Dr. Collins has an upcoming scholarly monograph, The Black God Truth, a tradition of race, religion, and rhetorical resistance. This project began as his dissertation and is slated for release in early 2023 through Lexington Books, Race, Rhetoric, and Religion Service series. So without further ado, Dr. Armondo Collins. This is going to be really a conversation between two 90 brothers. So, Dr. Collins, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, in addition to your fabulous introduction, fraternally, I came into Black fraternities in 1996, spring of 1996, March 14th to be exact. I pledged at Barbara Scotia College, and I emphasize the word pledge because that is the crux of the matter tonight. When we came over, I transferred a year afterward and went to Livingstone College in Salisbury, North Carolina, where I graduated. In the time that I was at Livingstone College, I became a lifetime member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. And I also took over at least 3 lines as an undergraduate. When I graduated, I came back to Livingstone to work for 5 years. And in that time, what you see in this book transpired. I was the undergraduate advisor and a full-time member of the graduate chapter. And I got a chance to see Omega and fraternalism from a lot of different angles. What we have here tonight, this book, came from a long discussion that I had with one of my best friends in graduate school, Mr. Anjan Basu. He's an outlaw. And while we were getting our master's degrees, he was also the editor of the A&T Register. And he wrote an editorial saying, bring pledging back above ground. It made sense to its immediate audience, the article. However, there is a wide body of scholarship and opinion on this. And what we saw was pushback, or better yet, what you saw, Joe, was a lot of pushback from a bunch of academics. And if you've read this novel, you'll notice that the prologue is very academic. It actually started as an academic response to that body of scholarship. But me being the writer that I am, it grew into something different. An opportunity for voice and agency within our organization, or better yet, within life. Our organization and the culture that surrounds it has an over 100-year history that very often gets silenced by institutional needs and the demands of the outside world. I mean, even today, we saw our young brothers out here set out high, which is normal for us, but for a lot of people who see these guys as men going to school and matriculating every day, it's foreign. Nobody knows that that's a part of their world and what an integral part of their world that is. But these organizations, not just for me, but for a lot of people, have been world shaping, world building, character building institutions. And even within the violence that you see in hazing, which I don't condone necessarily, that value system is being taught and being transmitted generation after generation after generation. What I wanted to do with this work was talk back to the academic scholarship from the perspective of a person who is boots on the ground and who has been boots on the ground in a lot of different positions within the organization.
Okay, so when do you think you start to consider yourself as being a writer?
When I was an undergraduate and I transferred to Livingstone, I went from mass communications to English liberal arts. The short answer was because there was no mass communications major at Livingstone. The long answer is my idol has always been Langston Hughes. I've been reading him as the Black author. I didn't know that there were others. My bad, John. Up until then, since I was about 15 or 16, I went to college because I wanted to be that. I didn't know that there was a path to be that and that I could do that, but that's what made me want to write. That's what fueled my love for literature. And that is also, Langston Hughes specifically, is the reason I joined the fraternity. Not because of him, but, and y'all can attest to this, you have to write an essay to get it. You have to do research on a member. I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota, where there are very few Black people and very few role models. Scratching the surface of the organization introduced me to more Black intelligence and success than I even knew existed. As soon as I was introduced, I said, yeah, that's me, all day. It became a pathway. Sometimes you need to see somebody else do it, even if you never saw them do it. And these organizations, for a lot of us, myself included, gave me a pathway.
So, a lot of people grow up want to be, a policeman, a fireman. At what point did you know that you wanted to be an author?
When I met, it was my junior year in college, well, my junior going into senior year, I read a book called Stolen Legacy. And I came back to school and I wanted to know more about it. Nobody in the English department could answer my questions about Stolen Legacy. If you understand what Stolen Legacy is, you'll see that. But they referred me to a new professor at Livingstone named Dr. Matthew B. Johnson. He's an Omega, and he was in religious studies. And not only did he tell me about that book, he told me about a whole bunch of other books, and the one that he's writing. I finally ran into Langston Hughes. I'm a very confident person in my abilities, but sometimes I need to see it done. And to see somebody doing it, and they came from the same lineage as us, okay. As frat brothers, we are not biologically related. However, we cousins, we brothers, we family. Seeing you do it means I can do it. And not only that, the value system that was already in him, that the fraternity allowed or facilitated, the mentoring shit, the overt mentoring shit, had him take me under his wing. Every day he was like, oh, you're smart? Here, read this. Read this. Oh, you missed class? I'm gonna come get you at home. You're the Bruz. Scholarship is a part of us. Get over here. That experience wasn't only indicative of Omega, it was life-defining. So when you say, what made me want to be a writer, seeing a writer who actually wrote, took care of his family, and reached back into the community to be a real person to people who need real people, that let me know that I'm on the right path and that I can do this and I'm going to do this.
So you have a lot of people that, you know, they put a lot of thoughts on paper. That's all they are, just thoughts on paper. What prompted you to write a book?
I'd always wanted to write a book. But as I said, the controversy with I wrote the first chapter, and it was going to be an academic essay. But at the time, I was so sick of writing academic papers. And to really talk about, I saw what I was interested in from what I'd written, my own experience. That's not how I want to tell it. And that's not how I was going to tell it. Originally, this story started out about the frat house. But what got put on paper, anybody who's a writer knows sometimes the writing takes over you. It tells you where to go. There's characters in your head that need to get out. These characters needed to get out. And the people that I pay attention to in the story are analogs of very real people, most of them. But their little slice of experience helps talk about the larger, bigger thing in a way that makes it coherent for people who are outside of the experience. When I wrote this, I understood it was going to operate on a bunch of levels. If you ever went to Livingstone College during the time that I went there, you know exactly who that is and exactly when that happened, even if that's not exactly how it happened. However, if you're an Omega and you read this, there are context clues that nobody else is going to get but you. But also, if you're a foreigner or an outsider to the experience, what it does is map out a good outline of what the broader thing looks like in its constituent parts.
So when it comes to writing a book, you know, some people have sticky notes all on the blackboard. Some people go off to a cabin reading the booze and lock themselves in for like 30 days. What was your writing process in putting this book together?
At least 2 hours a night. Right after I graduated, I had my second daughter, Anya. And as soon as I put Anya to sleep, around 10 o'clock, that's when I would go to the kitchen table and 2 hours of a novel. The thing that was driving me is, okay, you got kids, if you're ever gonna do it, you gotta do this now. So I'm sitting there 2 hours a night, and I don't always write during these 2 hours. Sometimes it's just me staring at the page. Other times I have nothing new to add, so I just revise what was already written. But dedicating myself for 4 to 5 months, I got my novel out of my head. Since then, I've written 2 others. But it's because you have to first start. And you have to, everybody in here who is a writer knows you have to get over your own ego. And say, I don't care if it's right, I don't care if it's wrong, I just have to do it. You got something on your head, you gotta scratch it, you gotta get that itch out. Put it on paper. A lot of times we fear putting our words on paper because it makes it real. If you start writing the story, now you really can't stop. But if you are out here and you're a writer, start and don't stop. Even when you tell you don't stop. Or even when you tell yourself stop, don't stop. The end product will get you to where you're going. I am confident.
So, people in other professions, they have things that are very important, in their craft. So what would you say is important elements of good writing?
Reading, but also reading other authors. Reading other authors who are good. Reading other authors who don't write like you write, or write what you would write about. Human beings are imitative creatures, and for a creative art like writing, imitation is often people's pathway to success. Although everyone will tell you that they're an original, and they are, nobody is self-created in the writing world. I know I'm not, and I know that I can see my favorite writers within my favorite writers. So I'm not just speaking in the wind. I really do believe, as practical advice for a writer, that reading other authors who have been successful, not only in the genre of writing that you want to write, but in genres that you haven't even been interested in. It's a key to success. Reading is a key to success.
So you alluded to Langston Hughes being one of your favorite writers. What other writers inspired you?
Zora Neale Hurston, Gloria Naylor's Linden Hills. That is my favorite book ever. As a kid, like, I still read it obsessively, at least once a year. Academically, Manny Merrill, easily Manny Merrill, and Bell Hooks.
So you got this book, Bruz. We don't want that to be a one-hit equivalent or something back from the 90s. What are your future literary books?
I have an upcoming academic book called The Black God Trope, where it's a book of rhetoric, but I'm discussing Black people talking to other Black people about being Black. And I'm talking about how we very often use God as a trope for talking about social issues. And what I try and nuance is, just because Black people are talking about God doesn't mean they're saying the same thing. There's a diversity of voices within us. Same thing with this brother. Everybody doesn't have the same perspective. I give 4 or 5 examples across genres of African Americans using God as a trope to talk about African American life and living in their contemporary world. As we all know, the Black experience although is connected. It ebbs, flows, moves in history just like anything else. People are very often use the trope to speak about their existential moment in the immediate, even though it may be universal with what they're saying. What they're trying to do is talk about the internet and a way of connecting to an audience. A very easy, tried and true, has been using language that they understand in a way that they don't necessarily understand.
So I got friends that talk about writing a book for about 3 or 4 years. Every year we get the same thing. So nothing on the paper. What advice would you give to somebody who wants to get started on writing their first book?
Right. Okay. And I gave this advice to the board. Write the first chapter, even if it's only a page, and then keep writing. Eventually, the writing is going to tell you what it was to do. And never give up. A lot of what stops writing from happening is an intersubjective conversation that the writer is having to themselves about it. Telling themselves that you guys are going to say it's not going to work before any of you ever see it. Pushing past that as a person is what will get the eventual story out.
Okay. Now we get ready into this stuff. The book. So I'll be honest, when I was told that there's a brother that's getting ready to write a book called Bruz, because we know that out of all fraternities, they know who the Bruz are. I'm thinking to myself, okay, what kind of secrets are these?
That's right.
You know, who knows?
He's snitching.
We need to go down a conversation before, before this book is written. So as we talk about the book, I want you to, pick the book up, read a little bit about it, read some excerpts out of the book. But what part of the book did you have the hardest time writing?
The chapter called Pledging, which I want to read from. If you notice, there's a shift in voice. It starts off third person, almost, and I have to bring it back to chanting the third person voice, because logically you can't be in this room when this is happening. I realized, and I kept it in the book, the reason that I did that instinctively is because it was a very real moment that was painful to someone else. And that wasn't my story to tell. And although I call this a satire, and I keep the book very lighthearted, if you step back from the book and look, and if that is an actual fact, something really tragic and painful happening to an adult person that they have to process through the rest of their life. And however they do it, come to a state of normal. We were talking earlier about the documentary Hazing. And flippantly, I said, brothers aren't walking around traumatized. Some are. For a lot of different reasons. And I understand, and I know from my personal experience, that experience traumatized some of those people who had to go through it. But it also shows how what I say in the story is true. The bifurcated nature of all of these organizations, not just Omega Psi Phi. In the world of this book that I create, Omega Psi Phi is there, all of the Greeks are there, and the Bruz are there. To keep it fair, no copyright infringement. But in all of these organizations, there are people who have been traumatized and they don't get a chance to talk about it because the person who was doing the act of violence to was in a position of respectability, where what they were doing isn't considered hazing. But what other people are doing is, and if you read the book, that's kind of the crux of what happens. What you see is an inversion of that respectability politics. The people who normally in academic discourse about this get labeled the thug, criminal, violent people are actually just human beings living their life, and they do this. But the people who are trying to stop it, regulate that lane allows predators who are doing a different type of hazing, but it's a much more vicious and pernicious form of violence. But if you don't look at it like that, it would seem totally normal. As an advisor, I saw a crackdown on hazing. And the after effect is the criminalization of the new class of leaders. These organizations were all designed to create and promote the next generation of Black leaders, intentionally. However, what we're doing with this bifurcated culture of good frat, bad frat, underground culture, the institutional culture is we're allowing for us to say that those people are bad. Those people are whatever criminal narrative you have of Black people. Stick that on. The reason that this book starts with the 1989 incident is to say, yes, there is a real tragedy going on with this story. This comes from a very real premise. But if you look at the broader picture, it's real people going through all of this, and there are a bunch of different positionalities that are affected through this experience. And in the particular chapter that I was talking about, pledging, 3 pledgees are brought to the house of a bro who says he's going to stop hazing. And his means of stopping hazing is getting them to let him take pictures of them. What he does is take those pictures in order to stop pledging secretly. I don't know how he developed these pictures. Couldn't have went wrong. But he says he mailed them to nationals. He says he mailed them to Raleigh. He'll go to the news. But you just took pictures of people against their will, under the coercion of this is the only way you'll get into the frat. For me, Armondo Collins, give me a set of words, but don't take no pictures of me. If you thunderclaps, that whatever, I can do that. But that type of intimidation to that end, it's a little weird to say the least. But the person who did, and I just found this out myself, the person who I was comically talking about in that story, that was really an issue in that person's life. And that very real incident of me saying, oh, don't do that. That really stopped violence in somebody's life. There are 3 parts of this story that are like, yeah, that's real. The prologue, the letter from nationals, or at least my interpretation of that letter, like that thing happened, and the pictures. People get hazed in this story. People go to different campuses and they argue, but that's not the problem. The fact that we created this underground culture that, if not carefully managed, invites a lot of different types of violences. If we let that go unchecked, we are destroying ourselves in ways that we hadn't even anticipated. That's the serious part.
So I know as you was writing, you had to reflect on some stories that might have made you laugh. So,
And I could have supposed to have been there.
what was the most fun about part around the book?
Getting a chance, okay, like I say, there are very few things that are actually real, but there are a couple of boroughs names who I actually used, and I tried to contextualize them. Without going too deep into their real life, contextualize them as a real person, how I experienced it. One is Dirty Red. Dirty Red is a real person. I'm going to see Dirty Red this weekend. That's how he talks, that's how he acts. All of that didn't happen, but it kind of did, and that's really how he feels about it. There was another brother named Ken Simmons. That is one of the best human beings I've met. In the story, Aiden is saved over and over again by his friendship relationships. One of the things that the story is designed to underscore is that these are real human beings and their relationships are what is important. Ken Simmons is a very important brother in my life. because of the type of friend that he's been in real life. The story doesn't capture all of it, but it captures the spirit of Ken coming into this particular work.
So, which one of these characters do you identify with the most and why?
Aiden Chance, that was me. Like, it's not really me, but that was who that character is based on.
So when you're writing, which one comes to you first, the plot or the characters? And why?
The plot as a premise. As I said, this story was originally about us hanging out at the frat house. A frat house that we built unofficially. That's what the whole story was gonna be about. But what came out of my brain were these characters. And once these characters start talking, you can't just leave that character dangling. And as I'm writing, oh, it's not only do I want this person to say this, this person wants to say this. It's kind of hard to explain, but characters take on a life of their own in the writer's mind very often during the writing process, at least for me.
So when a writer writes a book, there are always some nuggets of something in the book that you want the reader to take away from it. So what do you want people to take away from this book?
What I've learned most about my time in the organization is that friendship is essential to the soul. None of us are an island in and of ourselves. We all, as competitive and individualistic as our culture teaches us to be, that's not a reality of human life and living. Even the most individualistic person is made up of a village. And more often than not, we survive through our villages. Rhetorically, if I may, our communication networks are our survival networks, very often. And we take them for granted, but the people who love us are important, no matter how those relationships show up. You can't let abuse happen and flow unchecked. However, every situation is its own situation, and if you're not in the middle of it, it's very often easy to judge, but hard to understand. The reason I picked this subject is because if you ain't us, you really don't understand why we act like that. Why are they so exuberant and yelling and barking? They're happy, they make it. That's them. Well, why do they act so rough and tumble when they're around each other? If you're an outsider, wrecking looks like fun. If you're a bro, that's Friday. It's in America, because we live in these big boxes, or there's these super boxes that wind up supposedly defining people. A lot of the nuance of human relationships and social networks and groups gets lost. One of the things that this book was designed to do is talk about a subaltern, a Black group inside of Blackness that everybody knows the Bruz, your favorite teacher, your cousin, your uncle, the cop, the judge. That person is either a member of Omega Psi Phi, Alpha Phi Alpha, Kappa Alpha Psi. These people are world changing and life changing, but we act like that doesn't matter. You don't get the 20th century without these organizations. Go look up your favorite leader. But back to my favorite author, Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes published a lot in our fraternity's journal, York. He never wrote the Bruz. What is that? Well, one thing is the crisis of the Negro in the election. You have to go through white publishers to do it. Who wants to read that? Well, according to some people. Well, what I wanted to do was be Langston Hughes with access to the internet and cut through that to tell a story that wasn't getting told. I know it's hard. I know that there are people who that is an analog to. Those are real people in real time. If we're gonna have a narrative of Black male irresponsibility and criminality, we need the Bruz as a countermeasure. I know those people every day. I've seen them go from 20-year-old knucklehead to superintendent of a school district. Those are real stories. And although this story is very lighthearted and doesn't touch on it, it at least humanizes the people who are actually humans who are there.
So we read a little bit of work like this. Look at it from a critical eye. So what are some of the criticisms that you had about this?
Two of the major ones is one, I'm condoning hazing. The book doesn't, and in my own life I don't. But I am a hazer, I hate people. I'm not backing away from that. Also, that I got, like you said, when you look at it, the purple cover, it says the Bruz. Whoa, what did he say? Hey. I was with, what did he say about me in it? I intentionally got as close to my own experience in Omega Psi Phi as I could without infringing upon the fraternity or anything that's real in someone else's lives. For instance, the way that it's spelled, B-R-U-Z. If you're a Q, no, it's Bruz. The number of people outside of the organization that pronounce it Bruz. It's not hesitant. But I also didn't want to call it the Qs or Omega Psi Phi. The organization is itself, I love it and revere it, and it is a franchise. It deserves its own space. In the text, I handled that, creating that distance by including everybody who is a Black Greek on the fiction yard of Limestone College. And the Bruz just happened to be a fraternity. I also explained early on that the term Bruz is a term that does get applied to Omega Psi Phi a lot. However, if you travel and see these other organizations on certain yards, that's part of their nomenclature for themselves. And what I tried to do was create something authentic, but not so real that it's infringing upon somebody else's privacy or with these organizations, their copyright.
So, big question. Why did you choose to write about this subject matter? Because on page 31, you clearly state why you are sharing these details, but of all things, why this subject matter is so passionate for you.
Because, well, like I said, once I got introduced to the scholarship surrounding the conversation, I saw that didn't align with my own experience. And my experience doesn't not mean anything. And since no one else was telling my story, I wanted to tell my story with an understanding that I'm telling a lot of other people's story in the process of doing.
So before we get to the part of hazing, pledging and hazing, there was a question for the audience. So the question is, expand in your view, expand on your view that you were asking the frat to produce the type of leaders that you wanted to be. Specifically, your statement that was what the frat was built to do.
There's a book written by a brother named Walter Kempton called Black Greek 101. And in it, he traces the history of these organizations within the African-American experience. And one thing that jumped out at me in his conversation is that these organizations were strategically designed to create a next generation of Black leaders, college being an essential component of upward mobility, especially at the time we're talking about, early 20th century. These organizations were created by members of older organizations so that you don't have to get to age 50 and be established to be a leader. We've been working on this since you decided to go to school. And if you look at the history of these organizations and the people who come through them, what they've done and their outlook on themselves and the organization, it aligns with the idea of intentionally creating responsible leader African Americans who are responsible leaders who think not only of themselves, but also the community as a whole. Remember in the early 20th century, the idea of racial uplift was very prominent. My success is only success if it somehow inflects me bringing everybody else up. Our organization, one of our cardinal principles, a strongly held value, is uplift. It's a shorthand way of saying lifting as I climb. As I get up, I'm going to take you. At the turn of the century, this is not just an offhand notion. African Americans had to create ourselves as a society. And we had to create mutual aid societies for ourselves in a lot of different ways. If you look at Black fraternities and sororities, what you're doing is creating a network of people that, in one instance, just the small bit, can act as an underground railroad for a person who is being college educated, who has to travel hundreds of miles to get back home. I can stay at my LB's house. Seems like a small thing now, but turn of the century, uppityness is listed as one of the leading causes of lynching. And you being Black going to school or even looking educated, in certain areas, if you don't have some protection through the people you associate with, you could be in very real danger. Moreover, once you graduate, who's gonna get you that first job? Who's gonna tell you where to go? Who's gonna say, yeah, it was like this for me, this is why they be tripping like that? This is America. You have to create social networks intentionally in order to survive as an individual, but definitely if you're thinking grouphood or collectivism. The reason that I use this novel to push back is because I haven't forgotten that original message. I think that violence, especially anyone who dies in violence, is reprehensible. In the book and in my real life, I've said, nah, you know what, y'all? This hazing thing really ain't worth it. However, I'm not gonna go as far as saying that these are bands of criminals these are bullies, or that these organizations have outlived their purpose. The thing that created them is still here.
So another question is, college book of satire. When a lot of us in the room seems real. So why is that?
It is a satire. If you've ever been to Livingstone College, which is the premise for Limestone College, you'll understand, and sat on the plots which are in the dead center of school, you'll see how this shows up as satire. It is a spoof of life at an HBCU. The interconnectivity that happens through relationships and the possibilities that could come from them. And I say that as one of my frat brothers just just got installed as the new president of Livingstone. He's in there, but not as president, but he might feel some kind of way about the way the president is characterized in that story. But damn if that ain't him. I tried to write it as lighthearted as possible to balance out the weightiness of the subject. I'm not talking about the fun times that we had as girls. So I had to kind of maneuver around it in order for an audience who is not a Bruz not to be weighted down by what they're doing.
So, because of time is drawn, I got a few questions from the audience. So we talked a little bit about the documentary hazing. Question is, how is this book, The Bruz, speaking with and against Byron's recent documentary?
Well, I think we both wind up at the same place. Wanting to know whether or not there is a better way, and questioning whether what we're doing, even with all of the rationalizations of it, is it justifiable? Do the ends justify it? Where we differ is our characterization of the people, the process, and its effects. I think a criticism he may have of me is that I'm being too flippant. Although I do acknowledge the hurt and trauma that people have felt through death and injury from these processes. It's not what I focus on. And in fact, the way the story goes, you'd say I almost ignore it. But my pushback to that is that I don't ignore it. It's that I jump into the perspective of other people who are in it, to understand that, for one, it's easy to say this is bullying, but bullying implies almost a one-way power relationship. Jumping you. That ain't this. In fact, the way I characterize it, it's more like Fight Club. If you watch the movie Fight Club, every day there are people coming knocking at the door of Tyler Durden and willing to stand out on the porch all day to do whatever I want to do to get into Fight Club. That's more in line with what I experienced. And even to point to hazing. He uses a lot of graphic images to create his narrative. I get it. People getting beat up and hazed. But if you look at it, did any of those people run? Did you see anybody try to fight back? To me, that's a social contract. I'm gonna let you haze me as long as I get in this organization. I've talked to far too many people who have had the option. No, spend your money, sign this, and you're good. Mr. Collins, when I was advising, no. You don't understand what I'm saying. I play like, and they come up with this, and they get it's real. I gotta be real and authentic. No, you don't. You don't gotta do that. And from my experience as a bruh, it's probably not gonna make you a better person. Like, if you ain't already a good person, that's not what it's gonna do. But there are people who want that experience, and they're signing up for this, for that. What I try to show is that the experience itself is much broader than that. I've been in the frat almost 30 years and pledging 4 months out of my life. But those relationships that I have inside the organization have been lifelong and life-sustaining in more ways than one. And have the experience that I've had afterward supersedes anything that was happening online. And even when I was online, my personal experience, I wasn't weighted down by the violence. Although that's not everyone else's perspective on it, that is my perspective, and I'm just as valid a person and a participant in this conversation as anyone else.
So, closing comment. What would you want people to take away from your perspective on this book, The Bruz, and how writing this book is impacted?
One, that these Black Greek organizations, although they may seem esoteric to people who are not participating in them, I don't think that they're outmoded, useless, or a public nuisance, as some of the literature characterizes us as being. It's not pathological behavior we're engaged in. Moreover, I would want people to understand that as Black people, we're humans, and there's a lot of human networks and communication groups and practices that we have that, just like any other culture, may seem foreign to a mainstream observer, but they're no less authentic, real, self-sustaining, and or valid than what other people do. Again, it's illegal, hazing is wrong. However, look at these organizations and talk to the people who are in them. Go to a barbecue and just ask. If you talk to them about how they view their experience and they view this as a culture, you'll start to see kind of aligns with what he said in that book. A little more than some of these other narratives do.
So